I am Alice, a 33-year-old sales executive at an e-commerce company in Winona. I have a happy family with my husband Scott, my son Oliver, and my mother-in-law Ruth. I grew up in Philadelphia and had a happy childhood. I got married at 18 while still in college, studying business management. My parents, who loved me a lot, were against it because they worried about my future. But I was deeply in love and didn't think about the consequences. My boyfriend and I seemed perfect for each other. We rented a place to live and worked multiple odd jobs to make ends meet because our families had cut us off. We had our first child when I was 19. At first, everything was going well, and we managed our parental duties. But soon after Oliver was born, things changed. My husband's father died in a car crash, and his mother had a severe shock that led to her being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Not being able to see his family deeply upset my husband. I supported him, but he eventually quit his job and became irresponsible. He got into gambling and became abusive. When he hit our 5-year-old son, I left him. I started over from scratch and found my current job. I decided to take a break from dating to focus on myself and my son. After a year, my best friend invited me to dinner with her and her fiancé. At the restaurant, a handsome man with warm hazel eyes asked if he could sit next to me. It was Scott. Yes, please, I smiled. We met again shortly after at her wedding, but we barely spoke. At the end of the evening, though, he came up to me and said, "Alice." "Oh, hi," I replied. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you look stunning in that gown." I shyly thanked him and asked if he would like to take a walk after the wedding. During that walk, we talked about our career goals, hobbies, and families. There was no going back after that. We eventually started dating and got married. He's been a loving father to Oliver. Every year on Oliver's birthday, we visit a new city. Scott has literally been the only father Oliver has ever known. Even my mother-in-law Ruth loved Oliver, but things changed after I got pregnant. One day, while waiting at the checkout counter at Walmart, I overheard her talking to the cashier. "Please check once again if any fruit is not rotten. My daughter-in-law is pregnant and I do not want her to get sick." "Oh, congratulations. Will this be your first grandchild?" "Well, it'll be my first real grandchild. I have a step-grandson who's 10 because my son married my daughter-in-law when he was 5, but I try to treat him the same." Tone was full of pretense, and the cashier, keeping things professional, only gave a faint smile. That day I realized Ruth never truly loved Oliver with her whole heart. She also had a granddaughter from my sister-in-law, whom she adored since birth. She pampered her with gifts and spent as much time as possible with her. Anyone who saw Ruth with her granddaughter would think she was the best grandmother ever. Well, she probably was, but only for her daughter's child. One morning, I woke up to a loud argument between Ruth and Scott. "Are you out of your mind? No way I'm letting you do this," Ruth shouted. "Mom, please. Oliver is my son, and I want to bring him up in the best way. I don't need any more children," Scott replied. I was furious to hear that Scott didn't want to have a biological child and that Ruth was mad at both of us. Scott and I had discussed this the night before, and I had strongly advised him against it. "Hey, what about the family lineage? Oliver is your grandchild, and he will continue our family line. I'm not listening to this erratic decision. If you decide not to have kids, I will end my life," Ruth threatened. "You were just being ridiculous." "All right, I promise we won't do that," Scott said. "Tell me, did she brainwash you into this?" "What? No, Mom. She told me you would be upset about this and that I shouldn't bring it up. This is solely my decision. I didn't want a strained relationship with my mother-in-law. She had been very accommodating before, and I didn't know what caused the differential treatment. But I was sure we could win her over again with our love. I didn't know that was my biggest misconception. We were at a farmhouse for Ruth's birthday, and we were eating apples. She had already eaten 2 apples but wanted more. Scott refused. Then Oliver playfully whispered into her ear, "Don't worry, Grandma. I will sneak an apple for you upstairs." Scott commented, "What's going on over there?" But Ruth was not amused and said in a stern, accusatory voice, "Oliver, it is not good to sneak any food because of choking. You should not learn to pick food without asking an elder." I stepped in and said, "What you are saying is true, but he knows it's not appropriate. He was just joking around with you." "Yes, I am her apple dealer." We laughed, but she retorted, "It's even worse that he is trying to be my favorite. He shouldn't learn favoritism either." I was heartbroken to see my baby's face fall. All he was doing was trying to bond with his grandmother, who once loved him dearly. My husband could not take it. Mom, you know how much he loves you, right? He would never do anything to hurt you. Yeah, I'm sure you love him very much, she replied coldly. One day, I was cuddling with Oliver when she saw it and exclaimed, Alice, what are you doing? You were pregnant, and you were crushing your belly. It's not good for the baby. Don't do that before your delivery. Am I not even allowed to love my son? I wondered how rational that was, but I silently complied because I did not want any drama. Hell broke loose one day on Oliver's 12th birthday. Scott wanted to host a big party. We had invited many relatives, colleagues, and family friends. All of Oliver's friends were there too. We were preparing to cut his cake when suddenly my sister-in-law's daughter came crying up to my mother-in-law, who was standing beside me. She claimed that Oliver had hit her and pushed her to the ground. Her anger knew no bounds. I could sense she was losing her sanity. Before I could try to calm her down, she went up to Oliver and, without asking either child what it was about, slapped him. You have gathered a lot of guts, haven't you? Creating a scene on your birthday. Get out of the house. Oliver flinched at the impact of the slap and fled from the house, crying. I went after him. After some time, I came back and had to shout at her, What are you doing? It's his birthday. At least hear what he has to say. Stop siding with your son. I've neglected the fact that he forgets where he has come from. I have tolerated him enough. Mom, do you even know what the fight was about? They had an argument about you. She told Oliver you are not even her real grandson and continued to mock him, after which Oliver pushed her to the ground. She glared at me. I said, I absolutely do not condone his behavior for any reason, but I wonder where she learned this from. My mother-in-law was speechless for a moment. It was then that we finally found out the reason behind her selective behavior towards her grandchildren. It's pretty normal for me not to have affectionate feelings for him because he was born by an outsider and not my son. No matter what, the children of my biological children will always be dearer to me than your son. She turned away and continued, I'm going to love your baby more. This is completely reasonable, and that is how most grandmothers feel. They just don't say it. I couldn't believe my ears when she spilled her secrets. It was like a bolt from the blue, leaving us utterly flabbergasted. Where on earth did she pick up this old-school notion? Who was the sneaky influencer behind it all? And how in the world did she end up thinking like this? Her whole rationale had us all dumbfounded and at a loss for words. Oliver also told me how his grandma used to tell his sister before him that his brother or sister would be mommy and daddy's real child. I asked him what else grandma told him, and he shared how she had been telling him that he wasn't really her sister. I saw my mother-in-law look away with a hint of guilt. Now Oliver thinks that he is extra special to us because we don't want him to realize how his little brother or sister is always going to be grandma's favorite grandchild. What have you been feeding into his mind? I demanded. I didn't lie about anything. It is the truth, and he must realize it, she said. Unfortunately, Scott was away on a business trip when this happened. The next day, I told him everything. I'm not surprised at all, he said. She's always been quite cold towards him, sometimes acting as if he doesn't exist. I remember times he never received even a simple happy birthday from his grandmother, let alone gifts. She never shows any interest in his life, never asks how he's doing at school or about his friends. Scott then tried to talk to her. What you have done is too much, Mom. I have accepted it in bringing up Oliver as my own child. So what difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference, Scott, and it matters to me. Don't you even think of judging me. You can't force me to love your son. That's never going to happen. I don't feel he's my grandchild, and you'll have to get over it. But Scott was unyielding. No, Mom, it's you who'll have to get over not seeing us anymore. We don't need this kind of toxicity in our lives, and we definitely don't want our child to experience it. I want you to leave my house this instant. Shock and betrayal rushed through her face. She gaped at her son. Though I didn't want my husband to live away from his mother or to shun her this way, I thought it was for the best. It's not like we need her. We could be perfectly fine on our own. Being a grandmother to a child who loved her so much is a privilege, and she tossed it away by her own choice. Too bad for her. As much as it upset us, we had to make this decision. However, she wouldn't give up. That's not fair. You can't leave your elderly mother on the streets. I can sue you. Do whatever you want. You cannot see your grandkids from now on. You will be a bad influence on them anyway, Scott responded. Since she said that, I low-key hoped that when she got older, she wouldn't try to crawl back to us asking for help because our doors would be closed to her. If that's how you truly feel about me and my son, then you should not be a part of my children's lives. I will disown you legally and make sure you are not able to fill their minds with poison anymore, Scott said. He packed her things and she went to stay at her native home in Florida. Meanwhile, she kept threatening us over the phone and asserting her rights over the house and her grandchildren. She even bad-mouthed me to her relatives, blaming me for separating her from her son. Blinded with rage, Scott and I blocked her on everything after sending her a text detailing her actions that we heard from Oliver and his cousin, how it was absolutely unacceptable, and how she'd never see her grandkids until they were much older and could understand the world around them so they wouldn't be swayed by her words. We didn't hear from her for a long time after that. One day, we got an anonymous call saying my mother-in-law was admitted to a hospital after breaking her pelvis in the bathroom. There were chances she would never be able to walk again. Scott got frantic upon hearing this and rushed to be by her side. No matter how good a father Scott was, he was a son too. Though he was mad at his mother for what she did, he couldn't hide the fact that he loved her. Honey, I think stopping her from seeing the kids is inhumane. Now she's old and infirm and would want to be with her family in these difficult times. She's just a bit old-fashioned. Scott got a little emotional. I met her in the hospital, and she told me how being alone on the hospital bed made her realize how unpredictable life is and that she didn't know karma would hit her this way. I think we should bring her back home, he said, holding my hand and looking into my eyes. I don't have the heart to leave her alone at this time, and I cannot keep going back and forth to Florida that often. I hope you understand. Of course, honey, it pains me too to see her this way. No matter what, she is your mother and you should tend to her right now. I agreed. It's going to be a bit difficult with Oliver, but I believe she has realized that she was wrong. A few days later, she got discharged from the hospital, and we brought her home. Things were going smoothly, and I thought we had finally come together as a happy family. One day, Oliver was playing around the house when he accidentally slipped and hurt his elbow. We were unexpectedly visited by officials from the social services department a few days later. They said they had received a complaint that my husband and I neglected our child because we were eagerly awaiting the arrival of our own baby. The claim was substantiated when they saw the injury mark on Oliver's elbow and assumed we might have physically abused him. They attempted to forcefully take him away. I was scared and tried my best to convince them otherwise, but they wouldn't listen. They took my baby away. I was inconsolable, Scott said. I wonder who might have given them this false information. My mother-in-law suggested we visit the office and personally convince them to let us keep Oliver. After a lot of hue and cry, we were finally able to get him back and prove that they might have received a malicious call. But as we prepared to take Oliver home, he softly mumbled to me, "Don't leave me with Dad, Mama. I'm scared of him." This came as a surprise to me since he had never said that before. Scott was shocked too. He tried to hug Oliver. One day, I found Oliver alone and managed to talk to him about that day. Oliver loves his mama, doesn't he? Yes, Mama. And he never lies to me, so will he answer honestly? He nodded. Why are you scared of Daddy, honey? Did he say something? No, but Grandma said once the baby is here, he will throw me out of the house. Such spite. We gave her another chance to have a happy family, and she totally blew it. I realized she could never accept us. I also suspected she was the one who had contacted social services with the fake complaints. But I decided not to confront her right away and talk to Scott first. However, fate intervened. Ever since her accident, my mother-in-law had been using a wheelchair. That evening, she was preparing coffee when she accidentally spilled hot water on her leg. Mother of God, help! She screamed at the top of her lungs as she sprang from her wheelchair and rushed to the kitchen to get some ice. Coincidentally, Scott returned from the office at that moment. I came out of my room, and both of us were appalled to see that she had been faking her injury to get back into the house. Mom, you can walk? She froze and slowly turned around to see us. Oh, the impact of the hot water was such that I could finally walk. What a miracle. I guess she didn't realize that she couldn't fake it anymore. This is sick, Mom. How could you stoop so low? I have idolized you since childhood. And this is how you turned out to be, just because you despise a little child so much. I had never seen Scott so angry and sad at the same time. I trusted you and wanted to take care of you when I heard about your accident. This is how you repay me. Get out of my house now. Honey, please hear me out. I did all of this because I wanted to make you realize that we can be a happy family even without that child. Your child needs a grandparent. Don't deprive her of this happiness. What will you say once she grows up and finds out she has a grandmother you chose to hide from her? I will take care of it. When he or she is old enough to understand your wrongdoings, they will automatically see that you could have done no good by being around them. Scott packed her things and came back with her luggage. You can't be a good mother if your mind convinces you to do and say all that to a young child, and even brainwash him. We never saw his mother after that. A few months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Scott loved both his children equally and taught them always to stand by the truth. I often reflected on how different mothers can be. My mother was modern and progressive despite being from the countryside. She rarely talked about marriage and kids, always pushing me to fulfill my career goals. Unfortunately, I didn't value her ideas back then because I wanted to get married so badly. But life shows you the mirror eventually. I learned from my mistakes and the people I met. Scott and his mother were from the same family but different generations. While I cannot entirely blame her for having such notions, I think if she had truly loved Scott, she would have found happiness in his happiness. Her comments about and to my son had been unreasonable and unfair. Luckily, Oliver hasn't grown up to hate and disrespect her, but he always remembered her as his grandmother. I could not even begin to imagine what would have happened had she stayed with us longer and continued her dirty games. Fortunately, fate took its toll on her, and we were free of her toxicity and drama once and for all.